Well, here we are once again. I know it has been a while, but I have returned offering another tale that I am sure will chill you to your core. Please like, share, and don't forget to subscribe for more original stories from the Keeper of Tales. So now sit back, relax as we take a journey to find out what knocks at Debra's windows at night.
Debra Hutchins wasn't electronically savvy, but she needed something to help with an ongoing problem she was having. She stood a bit overwhelmed as the hum of fluorescent lights beamed down on her like the afternoon sun as she stood in front of the wall of cameras. Rows of glossy boxes lined the shelf, each one promising peace of mind. Motion detection, night vision, audio recording, cloud storage, live viewing. She ran her fingers across the packaging, imagining them placed in strategic spots along the exterior of her home. The service tech said these would get the job done. She murmured, half to herself. Saying it out loud didn't make her feel any better. She picked up a box and turned it over. More specs. It all seemed like a foreign language. All the features in the world didn't matter if the damn thing couldn't catch whoever or whatever was paying her unwanted visits at all manner of times throughout the night. As she weighed her options, a clerk passed behind her, pushing a cart stacked with routers. He gave her a quick nod, but his expression lingered, as though he'd overheard more than he should have. She forced a polite smile and moved down the aisle. After some minutes of contemplation, she selected 4 cameras she was sure would get the job done. By the time she reached the register, her mind was already at home. Imagining each camera set up around her yard, silent sentinels staring into the dark, she told herself she'd sleep easier once the cameras were mounted. That the knocks wouldn't sound so close, so personal, with a barrier of lenses between her and whatever or whomever it was knocking on her windows during the night. Hours later, cardboard lay torn open on her dining room table as she unpacked the cameras one by one. Clear plastic, smooth and lifeless. Greg, the son of one of her co-workers whom she had spoken with earlier that morning, agreed to help her install them. She carried them to the exterior corner of her home to the agreed-upon location like a priest laying down crosses. The sun was low in the sky as a cool breeze washed across the yard. The clouds periodically blocked the sun's rays as Greg worked steadily moving from corner to corner of the house, making sure each new eye pointed the length of the side of the house so as to gain the greatest field of view. When it was completed, she was sure that she would finally discover who was contributing to her sleepless nights. Greg bid her farewell as the sun fell lazily behind the trees that bordered her yard. She shut the door and began making preparations to turn in for the night. When she finally killed the lights and sank into bed, she felt the smallest spark of relief. Tonight would be different. Tonight, she'd catch it. Debra lay awake long before the knock came. The first knock came just past 3 in the morning. It came as it always did. Not a bang, but a polite knock. The kind a neighbor might use when asking to borrow sugar. Always in 3s. No more than that. Though sometimes fewer if she got too close to where it came from. The first time she heard it, she'd dismissed it as imagination, the brain inventing sounds to fill the night, like a lover whispering in her ear as she slept. If only she were that lucky. But it had been 3 months now, and finally Debra was ready. Her breath hitched. She didn't move, didn't call out. As she lay in bed, she reached for her phone and pulled up the app for the cameras. Her screen lit her face as she studied each feed in detail, scanning the corners of her yard. Silent lenses staring into the night. Every angle was clear, every shadow empty. The knock came again, as if calling to her. 3 taps, close enough to feel in the bones of the wall. She stared at the live feeds again, searching every angle. Were they installed properly? Why aren't I seeing anything? She whispered to herself. 3 featherlight strikes came again, but this time against her bedroom window. The sound stole whatever air she had. She pulled the curtain back a thumb's width and saw only her reflection, sleep-mussed hair, the pale oval of her face, overlaid on the dark. No shape beyond the glass, no silhouette. The hedges were darker strips. The sky was a dim slate. She swallowed hard as she lifted her phone and forced her eyes to the screen again. 4 feeds, 4 still pictures of nothing. She should have gone back to bed. That was the deal she'd made with herself. If the cameras saw nothing, she would call it a trick of nerves, a stray branch, her imagination circling itself. But something tugged at her attention, a smear on the center of her window, not a run of condensation. It was more deliberate than that. Debra stared intently at the smear, her mind trying to piece it together like some invisible, mystical puzzle. Slowly, she moved her face back from the window, and that's when a bit of light from her cell phone caught the glass. There it was, just as plain as day. 2 words appeared and disappeared with the tilt of the phone. Help me. The letters were uneven, the lines thin, their edges slightly clotted the way syrup dries on a plate. She set her fingertips beside the letters and measured them. The fingers that had written them couldn't have been large. The lines looked to be the size of a child's fingertip. Her stomach gave a slow roll. A child. Her mind only raced with more questions now. No more knocks came that night. She just sat up in the bed until sleep finally took her. The early light of daybreak finally thinned the room. The words on the glass looked smaller than they had in the dark. She stared at them until they blurred, then fetched a damp cloth to wipe it away. She wiped once and then twice, yet the words stood firm. With sleep fresh on her mind, it took her a moment to realize that the markings had been made on the outside of the window. With the damp cloth in hand, she put on her housecoat and went outside of the house to the rear bedroom window. She stared once more at the 2 words, took a deep breath and wiped it away, until the glass showed nothing but her own tired face. She made it to work on too much coffee and not enough sleep, and found herself at the break room counter stirring creamer into another cup of coffee. She didn't plan to say anything. The house was an old one. The neighborhood was quiet. Her mind wandered back to when she first called the police about the knocks. The police had been politely sympathetic once and dismissive the second time. Stray animals, the officer had suggested. Wind, kids playing pranks. Each time she nodded as if the officer's explanation helped, but they gave her no solace. Later that day, just before lunch, when her manager wandered past her cubicle and asked how she was holding up, she said, "Did anyone ever live on Juniper with a child? I mean recently? I thought I saw..." She stopped herself. No need for her co-workers to think she was off her rocker. "Never mind," she said under her breath. "Juniper?" The manager frowned, searching her memory. "There's the Kells at the corner, no kids. The woman with all the bird baths, retired. Across from you, the red door, that guy with the brown lab. Been years?" Her frown deepened into interest. "You hear something?" "Just curious," Debra said. She smiled in a practiced way to mask her true concern. The rest of the workday fell into place as the minutes went by. Things felt normal again, and as the end of the workday came, Debra looked and felt more like herself. It was only 4 in the afternoon, so once home she decided she would take a walk through the neighborhood. The sky was bright, and every now and again the clouds would block out the sun, offering some shade from its burning gaze. Juniper Street looked smaller in the afternoon, narrow and familiar. The houses mirrored one another. Shuttered windows, porch steps, box hedges. Up a few houses, a man knelt by a flower bed, stuffing cuttings into a bin. He glanced up, friendly. "Afternoon." "You wouldn't happen to know," she asked, "if a family with a little boy used to live around here?" He sat back on his heels, squinting. Around here? Not in a while. The school bus stop is on the other side of Maple. Why do you ask? He stated, his eyes staring inquisitively at her. Is everything okay? Fine, she said. Saw something on the cameras last night. Probably kids messing around. He laughed softly. That's funny. He paused, then added as if it cost him nothing. Some time ago, my ex swore our place had a visitor. Little footsteps, door creaks. We never saw anything, so I told her it was the house settling. She said that's what people say when they don't want to know. Debra nodded like they were swapping anecdotes about weather, but filed it away for later, and continued on her walk. 2 houses down Mrs. Rivera, small, brisk, lotion-scented, intercepted her at the mailbox. Debra, dear, how are you? You heard about the lot on the corner? They're putting in another box garden. Bless them. My basil never recovered from the last community project. I'm fine, Debra said. Then, unable to stop herself, do you believe in spirits? Mrs. Rivera's eyebrows rose. Spirits? I guess I do. You know, sometimes for whatever reason, a person's spirit can get trapped between here and the afterlife. Or maybe that person has a very strong bond to the world of the living, and they refuse to let go. She leaned closer, her voice lowering with the pleasure of being confided in. Is it about the knocking? Louis says he heard something last week when he took the trash out, like a kid tapping soft. He told me not to tell you because he thought it would worry you. Debra's mouth went dry. You heard it too? I didn't. He did. Mrs. Rivera patted her forearm. If it's a child's spirit, Carino, sometimes they need help moving on. My sister's neighbor had something like that after her nephew passed. She put out a little toy, a bright one on the porch, and a candle. She told him he could go. Then it stopped. Debra thanked her and walked home with the last bit of afternoon sun pressed on the top of her head. As she entered her home, the memory of last night seeped into her mind. She thought of the cloth she used to wipe away 2 words she could still see if she closed her eyes tight enough. Later on, as night became day, the light thinned and the cameras switched themselves quietly into night vision. She set a small toy on the porch anyway, a red rubber ball she found at the back of her kitchen drawer. She didn't light a candle. The idea of an open flame just seemed irresponsible. Instead, she whispered into the night, feeling foolish and desperate in equal measure. If you need help, she said, I'm here. But you can't knock on my windows anymore. Her voice seemed frail in the night air, each syllable swallowed by the night as if she had never spoken them at all. Only the red ball stood as a symbol of her desire to reach out to the unknown, this knocker at her window. Tonight she decided she would just watch and see if there would be any interaction with the ball she placed on the porch. She told herself she would stay in bed this time. If the knocking came, she would let the cameras do their work and watch the recording in the morning with coffee in hand like a person with boundaries. It only took until 2:40 before she woke as if summoned. She sat upright in the bed with only the darkness of night to greet her. At 3, the first knock came echoing through the house. 3 taps, polite, exact. The app lit up in her hand with a motion alert. Her heart stuttered. The feed opened to the front porch. Nothing. The walkway. Nothing. But slowly an image began to materialize. A boy stood at the edge of the frame, just inside the arc of the sensor, as if he'd learned the distance at which the camera would wake. He stood there at the apex of the porch as if frozen in time. He wore a plain t-shirt and pants. His arms were thin the way young boys' arms are, not having yet grown any bulging muscles. Debra's mouth opened without a sound as she stared intently at the boy now standing on her porch, looking on to see if he would accept the red ball and her request. Slowly, the boy turned his gaze towards the camera on the porch. He didn't look frightened. He didn't look hostile. His face was expectant, neutral the way faces are when the features haven't yet decided what they're going to be. He lifted his mouth and shaped 2 words with careful emphasis. "Help me." The boy's expression flickered in the way of old TV sets going from one channel to another. The edge of his right cheek stretched a fraction further than it should have. For a half beat, it was as if his skin was playing catch-up to the bones beneath. Then he was gone. Not walk away, not turned. One frame, he occupied space. The next frame, he was standing at the edge of her porch, and the next frame, nothing. She scrubbed the timeline back and forth. One frame there, one not. The feeling wasn't relief or fear. It had the oddness of a misplaced item turning up in the exact place you insist you already looked. She rewound and watched the mouth shape itself again, trying to read something else there. Trickery, a laugh, a taunt. All she saw was the smooth seriousness of a child asking a reasonable thing. But what else could she do to help? Debra woke the next morning with the night's events playing non-stop in her mind. There was no way she could work like this, she thought to herself. So she called in sick. Being one of the few workers that rarely called out, she didn't have to answer many prying questions. She definitely didn't want to explain all that had been going on at her home. It all had her restless and at her wit's end. She laid in bed for most of the day and decided to go for a walk around the neighborhood around noon. This always seemed to bring her some semblance of comfort. Along her walk, she nodded at Mrs. Rivera but didn't stop. She cut down to the creek path behind Juniper, where weeds brushed her shins and invisible insects found the tender spaces at her sock line. She told herself this was the last day. Either she would unplug the cameras, call a friend to sleep on her couch, or just wait it out until whatever it was lost interest in her. By late afternoon, she had found her way back home. The walk had done her some good, and things for the moment felt right. She took a cool shower and made tea as she sat at her kitchen counter, staring out of the kitchen window. She checked the cameras and noticed the ball on the porch was still there in the same spot. Before her mind got lost in thought, she set the phone face down. Debra took a deep breath and enjoyed what was left of her tea. Around sunset, noise from across the street made her look up. 2 teenagers were loading a trunk with fishing gear, giddy and loud. One of them saw her at the window and waved reflexively. She waved back, grateful for the proof that the world outside still had its own schedule. At 8, the sky slid to blue-gray and then to charcoal. By 9, the digital clock on her stove clicked softly to 9 p.m. Debra sat at the kitchen table, palms flat. She had never felt so much like she was waiting for an appointment. "Will the knocks come again tonight?" she thought to herself as she sat at the kitchen table. The uneasiness of it all wrestled in her mind. Until she finally headed off to bed, her mind and body finally succumbing to the stress of the knocks. And now the ghostly boy had placed on her mind and body. She decided as she headed to bed that tonight would be the last night. She tried once to reach out to the boy to no avail. Tonight, she would try one last time. If it worked, great, but if not, then she would put this whole sordid thing behind her. The night took her as she slid between the sheets, her head sinking into the softness of the pillows. The knocks didn't come until sometime after 3 a.m. Steady, yet different than before. The spacing was odd. The first 2 a hair too quick, the third after a pause that was like someone hesitating. They came from the back. Debra got out of bed and slid into her sneakers she had placed at her bedside. With the phone in hand, she flipped to the cameras. There, just out of frame at the side of the house, stood the boy, but this time he wasn't facing the camera as he had done the night before. His back was to her, but she knew it was him. She made her way to the living room phone, still in hand, and opened the front door. The night air felt different, heavy, alive. The noise of the house seemed to stop as if a switch had been thrown. The little hums, the refrigerator, the ceiling fan, the water heater, all vanished the second the night air touched her face. She stepped onto the small concrete step and let the screen door close behind her with the soft rubber-lipped sound she had known since moving in. The yard was a field of dark with varying shades of black, fence boards, hedges, the leaning shadow of the maple. Debra looked up at the camera in the corner, its red eye blinking as its tiny motor adjusted to her movement. She moved to the middle of the yard and turned slowly once, twice, her eyes scanning her surroundings. There by the hedge near the far corner, facing away from her, she could make out a faint outline. The boy's posture could have belonged to any 10-year-old waiting for a parent to call him in from play. One foot a little forward, arms loose at his sides, weight balanced. To her, he looked to be just any normal 10-year-old boy. He wore the same t-shirt and shorts she had seen him in many times before, but his neck was thin and a little too long. Debra's throat closed on the dozen things she could have said. "Hey there, are you hurt? Where's your house? What's your name?" Not one of them made it past her lips. "I'm here," she managed, the words escaping through her tightened lips. The boy didn't turn. She took 2 steps toward him as her phone vibrated in her pocket with a motion alert. She didn't look. "Do you need help?" she asked. Slowly the boy turned. Not his body, just his head. It wasn't dramatic. There was no whip of movement, no sudden motion. The head turned like an owl sitting in a tree. His body didn't move. It stayed facing away from her as if pinned to the ground. The face that finally met her gaze was not a child's. The skin looked too small for what it covered, stretched tight over the planes, tugged back from the mouth the way people pull their mouths back for dentists. The eyes looked swollen, round not with surprise, but because whatever sat in the socket was pushing against its frame. The mouth spread into a smile. The teeth were long, not like fangs, but like boxy stones, crowded as if they'd been filed down and then shoved back in at wrong angles. When the smile widened, the skin at the corners didn't crease. It thinned and went glossy. The sound Debra made was a breath that didn't know whether to be a word. She turned and ran. Her shoes pounded the grass as she ran, each step seemingly in unison with her pounding heart about to burst from her chest. She flew past the porch and not even reaching for the back door. It didn't occur to her. She wasn't thinking. She could only run for all she was worth. She had to get away, had to escape. The woods behind Juniper weren't woods in the grand sense, just a thick buffer between the houses and the creek path. But at 3:15 in the morning, they were enough. The first few steps took her through a line of saplings that snagged her shirt and laced her upper arms with thin lines. The smell shifted, wet leaves and sour rot, and underneath the faint sourness of stagnant water 30 yards away in a little hollow where rain collected. She didn't look back until her breath became fire in her throat and her legs burned from the many lashes they had taken. When she did, she saw nothing. The yard had already been swallowed by the dark. She stood still, eyes watering, and her ears hearing. Nothing. Not even the overhead whisper of power lines. The world had gone silent around her. Debra slid down behind a half-rotted log and tucked herself in, the way she'd been taught as a girl to make herself smaller if ever she were lost. She pulled leaves over her sneakers and pressed her palms against the damp earth to stop them shaking. She told herself to listen. At first, only her pulse. Then a sound came, the unmistakable sound of something stepping down on the packed dirt of the path and then off into leaves, not crashing, placing, something that had learned that human ears are most afraid of silence. "Debra." The voice came from her left, low to the ground, a child's pitch, one filled with innocence. The firmness with which it said her name made her belly turn. She had not told the boy her name. "Debra, please," the voice said. "It's cold." Leaves whispered. A wet twig cracked. A second voice slid under the first like an echo speaking out of sync. It wasn't deeper just there. The same words in a mouth built for something else. "Please," it said again in both voices, almost overlapping. "Help me." She clamped her hands over her mouth until her knuckles hurt. A night insect droned by her ear like a tiny engine and flew off into the night. The stink arrived before the thing did, something like animal bedding gone long uncleaned, layered over with the metallic tang of old coins held too long and the sweet rot of fruit left under a sink. "Debra." The voices breathed her name in a way that didn't carry air. "Don't be afraid." Bones cracked. The sound was crisp, delicate, like little twigs being broken between fingers. A series of those sounds, one after another, in a rhythm that suggested moving parts being reset. She envisioned a torso unlatching where a torso shouldn't, a knee joint going in reverse, a shoulder sliding with a small clunk. "Come out," the Knot Boy said. The child's voice floated up. "Please." She closed her eyes tighter because her body demanded it, because the dark she chose felt safer than the dark she did not. The thing stepped into the narrow path just beyond the log. She knew it by the way the leaves pressed and then released. She knew it by the smell intensifying, filling her mouth and nostrils as if she'd licked an old battery. She knew it by the heat on her cheek, a pocket of warmth in the cold air that could only be breath. She did not want to feel it. She felt it anyway. The faint spray at the edge of each exhale, the tickle at the hairs near her ear, the stale damp of someone who lives in damp places. "Debra," it said in the boy's voice. "I'm hungry," it said in the other, not meaning food as a human might. Her body made its choice. The scream rose from the base of her spine like steam from a tea kettle. It tore her throat on the way up and ripped free. It filled the trees, the night, and bounced back unnatural. The sound was large enough that she expected the world to wake and come to her aid. But no one heard. No one came. Nothing changed. There was no reaction in the world that gave voice to what was happening. No porch lights snapped on, no dogs barked. The scream climbed and broke and kept going until she had no air left to fuel it. After, there was only one breath again, not hers. She had none. "Thank you," the voices said together, pleased, almost polite. No one on Juniper heard a thing. Not because the scream wasn't loud enough, but because in those moments between 3 and 3:20, the block fell under a soft hush, a pocket of quiet the way snow makes quiet. Except there was no snow. No one would remember the hush in the morning. In the early light, a jogger would pause at the rise in the creek path to stretch, breathe, and then shiver for no reason he could name. He would pick up his pace. A red rubber ball would still sit on Debra's porch. Her back door would be unlatched. Her screens would be in place. The cameras would show 4 careful views of night that looked like any night. And if anyone looked closely at the dining room window from the right angle at the right hour, when the day made a mirror and the kitchen behind became an overlay of pale shapes, they might think they saw something traced with damp fingertips near the corner of the glass. Not words this time. Just the ghost of a smile, too long for the space it had been given.
Now that was chilling. Just another reason to be careful when dealing with things that lurk in the night. You never know what you will find, or what will find you. The night can be unpredictable that way. Thanks for tuning in, and until our next tale, please leave a comment. And as always, should you find yourself lost along your travels, let our light be your guide.